So there's an interesting story about how when Christopher Nolan first called you up and talked to you about this movie. Could you talk a bit about that?
I ran into Chris somewhere, and I think we've developed over the years this way. It's sort of part of our friendship. We're trying to make life interesting for each other. So throughout a new town, and he said to me, if you were to write one page of something and not tell me what the grand subject was, would I give him one day and write whatever came to me from this one page? Sounds like a good adventure. Of course I said yes. And I opened the letter on a Sunday, and it was this beautiful typewritten piece of paper, quite thick paper, so I knew there was no carbon copy. It was strictly for me. And it was this fable, and I'm always going to paraphrase it because it was a personal letter to me, a fable about a parent and their child, thinly disguised as well. Him knowing my son Jake, about a father and his scientist son. Little did I know later on he was going to turn it into a daughter. And I sat down and I wrote this, very personal piece really about my own son. And phoned Chris up at about 9:30 at night and said, "Hey, I've done it. Do you want me to send it over?" And he goes, "Look, can you come down?" And maybe part of it is when we speak. I speak English with you, even though my first language is German. But
right.
The only time I really reveal myself, I feel exposed and fragile, is if I were to play you a piece of music for the first time. So the closer I am, in a funny way, to the greater the trust I have of the director, the more intimate and personal piece is going to be. So I had this really fragile piece which I played to Chris. And we get to the end, and I sort of, sheepishly go, "What do you think? Is it all right?" And he pauses and goes, "Suppose I'd better make the movie now." And I'm going, "Well, what is the movie?" Because of course he hadn't given me any context. And he starts describing this vast canvas of space and celebrating science, and we talk. Instantly we're in that conversation, the way we are in a conversation always. Talking about the last 9 years of our life, or 10 years of the Batman trilogy, which I don't think people really realize. It was 10 years of our lives. That's a fair chunk of life, where we had sort of forged this tone, this vocabulary, this musical vocabulary, and it was dark, and it was constantly looking inwards. And I remember Chris saying, "No, this one, let's look outwards. We forgot to look up at the stars. We are not explorers anymore. We don't celebrate science." And I love the idea that this was something which would put scientists front and center as opposed to the geeky sidekick.
Right.
And and at one point I went, "Hang on a second. I've written you the most fragile personal piece. How's this going to work with the vastness of space?" And he just said, "Look, I now know what the heart of the story is." And this really was our process from there on. We just sort of worked in parallel, constantly talking to each other, or me reading the script, or constantly asking questions, or constantly looking at design. We are. It sounds. Now I'm quoting the first line of Happy. It sounds crazy what I'm about to say, but it is the truth. It's like independent filmmaking at its greatest, because Chris cuts in his garage. We are a very, very small team. It's very private. It's very personal, and that gives us an enormous amount of freedom. Because one of the things Chris does is he keeps everybody away from me. So the conversation is just amongst this very small group of people, and usually it's just Chris and me. And I see everything that the music does in the score as absolutely a co-creation between him and me. it's very much, we are bad,
Yeah.
and some, he he writes the words, I write the music, and but it's we do these things together.
Right.
Um, and that now movies have 10 music, and people cut to music, etc. We never work that way. I mean, the thing is being created,
Mhm.
the music is being created as the story is being written, as the movie is being shot, and we literally found ourselves at this very odd juncture where, when he finished his cut, the whole score existed in synthetic form. Um, and everybody was sort of going, okay, you guys are done. And we're going, no, 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 hang on, we hear this stuff, we still hear things in our head. And it was, I think it really was only Chris and I, and we're, again, I mean, we're very in tune with each other, literally. And it was very hard to explain to people that, they thought it was finished.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't. We still, there is, on the one hand, it's nearly a duty that you have to go and get these other actors and these amazing musicians, and that you have to go and see what those last actors that join the crew on this film can bring to it. And on the other hand, it just is an opportunity to completely experiment. Because everything was so written, it was so constructed, everything was there. And we went to London, and rather than just putting the music in front of the musicians, the night before the first orchestra session, we had a dinner with all the principals in the orchestra, just sort of so that we could invite them in and really talk about the ideas, talk about the concepts, talk about what what the subtext was. The other thing we didn't, usually when you record a film score, you have the picture running.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't bring the picture with us. So it was just Chris and I and Alex Gibson, our music editor, having to, and it was really interesting because if you run the picture, it's really just information hitting.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, you have to sort of search a little bit and go, okay, hang on a second, the first time I saw this or the first time I read this, that was the feeling I wanted to convey. And so again, I had to be very precise and maintain specificity about all those things. But and at the same time, rather than the other thing is when you're the composer on the film score and you stand on the podium and you talk down to the musicians, it's not really that collegial. So Chris and I, we're much more, we're sitting down, same eye line as them, and we're just involving, we're just talking, we're just, which gives a slightly different commitment from the musicians.
Right, yeah.
Which was, it was great. I mean, it's just fabulous.
Right, yeah. I'm curious as to, because you keep talking about the intimacy of this story, and you also talked about the celebration of science. I'm wondering how you find a way to blend those two elements together, this very human story and this very grand kind of space epic.
Things happen in these conversations, and sometimes little things which are just asides become the main focus for me, and things like Chris talking about Kipthon and talking about the idea of time, gravity, and how do you go and consolidate these different theories which real scientists can't do, or which science hasn't found its way yet. But and me going, oh, hang on a second, this sounds like an interesting idea. This sounds like an interesting thing to approach in a sort of a poetic way. Or music, which has its own language.
Right.
So suddenly I'm writing a love theme, really, which is about gravity and time. Chris kept saying to me there should be a sense of wonderment about it, and I think that's that was an important word for me. not so much spectacle as about something that would invite you in. And the use of the music. I mean, this is entirely Chris on the dub stage. I mean, it's a very poetic way of using it, you know, and it's a very radical way of using it as well in the film. But I mean, two things to remember. Number one, he is the writer, so he can do with his words as he pleases. He can have them as loud and as quiet. And maybe this is just a European point of view. I mean, I grew up as a kid in Germany. I went to see my first opera when I was 3. I grew up with basically listening to music and not really being able to understand every word in La Boheme, but still bursting into tears at the end of it. There's a thing that happens. There's a thing that happens between music, images, and words, and story, and context, etc. That is more than it's more than the difference of its parts. And I think that was something Chris was very much aiming for. I mean, I know he was.
Right,
there's nothing random in this film. In fact, for me, it was the first time ever. Again, his process is different to other directors. There comes a period, a 6-week period, where every Friday we just see how far we got, and we watch the whole movie. Then we go and spend the following week, addressing things, etc. And the last screening we had, he's saying to me, is there anything you want, anything left, any other ideas? One tiny little idea still, and then I sort of went, something? Crossed every T, dotted every I. For the first time in my life, I could actually say, I'm done. Because every other movie I've worked on is there's still things to do on them, even to this day. There are things I just wish I'd done slightly different or whatever. But the very sort of disciplined way he approaches things actually allow for an enormous amount of chaos, anarchy, and freedom to go and express yourself and finish your ideas. And again, I mean, it's this idea that it's actually on the back of this watch. I mean, this is sort of very much the Interstellar watch, and on the back it says, "This is no time for caution." So that's how we approached everything.
Right.
It's and in this day and age to find, and this is what I think the world misunderstands what we do, because it just does, because it's not part of the process. In this day and age, to find an autonomous voice that makes large-scale movies is a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
And if I can just be part of supporting him and supporting his ideas, anytime, any place, anywhere, I'll drop anything.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's certainly a uniqueness in a lot of the music, especially with the use of that organ. Where did that come from?
Well, the organ was Chris's. After we sat there and basically tore through the last 9 years of our life, going, well, we've done the action strings, we've done the big drums, we've done the huge big brass section. Let's take all that out. Let's go and reinvent the language.
Right.
Suddenly there weren't any crayons left in the coloring box. And Chris said, "What about a pipe organ?" And as he said it, I had these sort of two conflicting thoughts. One was, oh, gothic horror movie, and the other one was, oh wow, and I visualized it, and it looks like the Afterburners on a Saturn rocket.
Right.
And it's this huge, and it's this amazing piece of technology. It's a piece of technology that is there to serve music and musicians. And the other thing which I loved about it was so much of the movie in one way or the other is about air and wind, and we can't function without air. Pipe organ cannot make a sound without air being pushed through the pipes.
Right, yeah.
And so just that simple, connection to something being incredibly human, and at the same time, it can make a hell of a racket. I mean, all our Friday screenings,
Yeah.
the first few, we just leave theaters in ruins, and we
Mhm.
figured out how to balance the roar of this beast, and it can roar, and at the same time it can make the most fragile and lonely sound,
Mhm.
and so I actually spent a year just learning about how to sort of tame the beast.
Right.
And there actually came a point, after we convinced everybody that we should go and record this, um, sort of on the plane or on the way to the airport, me just being full of doubts and going, Chris, I'm not sure if this is actually playable by any human being. And sort of negotiating what the barest minimum is we could come back with and still look people in the eye and going, no, it was great, it was a great trip.
Right.
And meeting Roger, say as our organist for the first time, and me being doubtful and sheepish, and him being English and very humble, and well, I had a look at it, sort of thing, and he says, well, maybe we should just go and play some of it. And literally, as soon as he started playing, I knew we were all right.
Yeah.
I started, one of those involuntary smiles you just can't quite
Yeah.
get off your face because
Yeah.
because I built myself up for disaster, and here was the man who actually was saving my baby.
Yeah. And I mean, it's what you said about how it makes the loneliest sound. That really works with the theme of the movie about this man who is out away from his family and is eventually alone.
And a lot of it was method composing. There was a
Uh-huh.
period last year. I mean, this thing has been going on for quite a few years in one way or the other, so I get confused sometimes about which summer I'm talking about.
Right.
When Chris was shooting in Iceland, and I had locked myself. I have an apartment in London with a little studio in it. I literally locked myself into there, and I wouldn't come out, and I wouldn't go and see anybody, and I just locked myself away from the world and just sort of experimenting around and just trying to focus the ideas and trying to find the voice, trying to find the tone of the movie. And it did get pretty lonely, but in a sort of in a good way.
Right.
In a good way. And the thing I noticed, which I sort of love, maybe that's a very German thing to love, but it's like the contradictions of people thinking it's too loud, it's all wrong, what have you done, it's not supporting, it's not serving the film, and other people being truly moved by it.
Right.
I was always the one going around and really believing it, that my job is, you're supposed to support the movie, you're supposed to support the story. And yes, it does do that.
Right.
But at the same time, I think you are supposed to go and reach for other things. You're supposed to actually go and try to elevate. You're not just supposed to support. And I'm not saying I elevated. I'm saying Chris Nolan pushed me.
Right.
Pushed me in the gentlest, kindest, friendliest way to come up with something which was intensely personal and hopefully elevated.
And you mentioned something about how when he first sent you this typewritten letter, it really touched upon something inside of you with your relationship with your son. I'm curious if on all the films you do, if you try to find some part of yourself in them, or if it's more difficult to do that with others, or if
it's the only place I can write from. I mean, remember, I'm the guy that didn't go to music school. I'm the guy who had 2 weeks of piano lessons. So the only place I can write from is my imagination and translating some personal experience into something. And actually, interestingly enough, the first person really, one of the two or three people, first time we showed the movie even to each other, was my son.
Really?
And I don't know, it was just an important.
Yeah.
It was important.
Yeah.
It's just like Chris and I realizing we had spent 9 years, which is a large chunk of our life, doing a Batman trilogy. And so if you don't think of it as movies, but if you think of it as the seconds of our life ticking away, yes, there is no segregation, no separation between job and real life. This time is time, seconds are ticking away. So it is important. It's important to try to find your personal space within whatever story it is you're telling.
Right.
And usually it's, like left-hand corner of the screen, there's something, that nobody else sees, but
Right.
to me is like, means everything.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
You're so very, very welcome.
Thank you.